Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Okay, so today we are going to shoot, I think it's knife edge retention tips number 6. Okay, the last one was number 5, of course, and number 5 was on de-stressing your edge. Okay, classic example of an edge that needs distressed is, let's say you buy a knife, whatever kind of knife it is, right? Probably a pocket knife or an EDC, something like that. You get it out of the box and it's nice and sharp right from the maker, the way it should be, or from the factory. You go to town working with the knife, right? And you're in love with the knife. It's cutting good. It's holding a good edge. Everything is bliss, right? Then all of a sudden, the edge starts to go dull a little bit, right? So you go ahead and you touch it up. Typically speaking, the guys that have the biggest problem with this are the guys that are doing stropping, except for straight razors. That's an entirely different deal. So stroppers, steelers, so the guys using the sharpening steel, okay, and high grit maintenance type stones. Typically what will happen with that is that, that knife will be cutting and cutting and cutting and everything's going great, right? And then all of a sudden the edge starts slacking off. So you go ahead and you touch the edge up, and then everything's cutting great again, but it doesn't quite cut as long as what it did the first time. So you touch the edge up again, and then it goes back to cutting really good, but it loses its edge even faster. Okay, what's happening there is the steel, the actual edge of the steel, or the actual edge of the knife. Okay. This amount of steel right here that you keep tuning up and tuning up and tuning up, well, it's damaged, okay? So it gets impacted, it gets hard shifts to the left, hard shifts to the right. Now, it might spring right back, but that steel gets worked, okay? And it's kind of getting work hardened, all right? So unless you remove that little bit of steel with a coarser stone, or by, bread knifing the edge and, getting rid of it completely and bringing up a new edge, then that edge, after it's been worked several times and touched up several times, will never hold an edge the way a nice fresh edge out of the steel back here behind that edge. That knife will never hold an edge with worn steel like it will with fresh steel. And the only way to get back to fresh steel is to abrade the worn steel away. So that's a classic example of that. Now, hand in hand with that is working on worn stones. Worn stones are way worse than high grit stones, okay? Now, if you think right off the bat, well, Joe typically likes a pretty coarse edge, then you're absolutely right. For the work that I do, 325 grit is right in the sweet spot. That is my absolute favorite edge. It produces an edge that is really nice and toothy, to where it just rips and tears through everything that I need to cut, but yet it's also fine enough that I can do some pretty good detail work, like cutting splinters out of my hand, or you can cut paper with it just fine, you can shave with it just fine. I mean, that's a little bit scratchy to shave my face with, but it'll take care of just fine. So worn stones, okay, now worn stones are defined as any stone that the surface of the stone is not clean and well maintained and fresh, okay? This is one of the things where the man-made Japanese water stones have got it all over pretty much all the other stones out there, with the exception of like the Norton crystalline coarse fine. Those are a man-made oil stone, but they're soft enough that they're almost always releasing grit, okay? Because it's that nasty stuff, that gray stuff that comes off of the stone, when you clean it with a paper towel afterwards. That's all that's worn stone particles. Stones that have a really hard time staying clean and staying, well-maintained are Arkansas stones. And don't get me wrong, I love my Arkansas stones. Those things are absolutely beautiful. They will produce a really nice edge and will produce a very useful edge, but they are very prone to glazing. Okay, now what do I mean by glazing? Glazing is when the surface of that stone gets glazed over, okay? Even if you use oil, even if you use Dawn and water, even if, use whatever kind of lubricant you want, bits and pieces of the stone, bits and pieces of steel from your knife edge, bits and pieces of dust that's in the air, trash that was on your knife edge, whatever, will plug up the pores on top of that stone, okay? Now you take a freshly lapped Arkansas stone and you run a knife across it, and you can feel the vibrations of that stone aggressively cutting that steel. You can hear it if your hearing's that good. Now you sharpen, say 30 knives on that same Arkansas stone without lapping it. Now all of a sudden, and it'll sneak up on you, you go to run a knife edge across it and it just doesn't feel like it's cutting the steel as well as what it was when it was, freshly maintained. That's because it's not. Now there is where the problem in your edge retention comes in. And I don't mean to just pick on Arkansas stones. The stones that I've had the biggest problem with doing that will be your Arkansas stones, your Norton Fine India stones to a lesser degree, but still kind of in the same class, and your ceramic stones. Not only your ceramic stones, but your ceramic hones also. I've got a Shapton Glass 220, does it awful. Absolutely, it glazes really fast. And it's kind of a tough stone to refresh also. I don't know if the other Shapton stones are the same way or not. I don't know, I don't have any. The ceramic like crock sticks, that you'll use for like, kind of like a steel, they'll glaze over really fast. Typically those are white. And when they get glazed over, you'll just see they're just black. And all that black is old steel, plugging up the surface of that stone. Now here is where, this is one of those things that I know it happens. It's really tough to see it in a microscope. And I think it's even a little bit tougher to describe it. So let's say you've got, now we're going to magnify this edge up considerably, okay? So this is like the side view. And this is your knife, right? Okay, now we're going to take this section of the edge, okay, and we're going to blow it up. So now you got this section of the edge here, right? Now this is looking at it like with pretty extreme magnification. When you look at edges underneath the microscope, you think that because when you look at them with the naked eye, you're like, okay, well that's exactly what that looks like, right? Well, that's not the case. This knife will look like it's a clean edge. The second you put it up underneath optics, it's going to look like this. Let's redo that. It's going to look like a sawtooth, right? Only the saw teeth aren't just at the end. They're all the way through your edge bevel. So this would look more like this. And if you want to see what this actually looks like underneath the microscope, I've got plenty of videos with my stereoscope where I got a camera plugged into the top of it and it's casting it to a television and you can see what it looks like. So what ends up happening is you'll have these little micro serrations in here, right? And this is an absolutely awful drawing. So, and this would be representative if you were doing, a stroke like this. If you were doing a straight push stroke on the stone, these lines would be straight up and down. All right. Now, when you have a clean, fresh stone that's cutting your steel really well, this is kind of what it'll look like. Okay. The tips will be nice and sharp. Okay. These grooves in the side of your edge bevel, they'll be distinct. They'll be nice and like clean cut, because that's what's happening is those particles in that stone are cutting any little bitty grooves inside your steel, or on the side of your steel. Now the size of your grit determines the width of these grooves. Okay, so if you've got a 325 grit stone, why then these peaks, these serrations are going to be 325 grit distance apart. If you're using a 700 grit stone, well, they'll be half the distance apart. If you're using a 20,000 grit stone, then they're just going to be just very, very small, but they're still going to be like this. When you're using a worn stone, a couple of things happen. One is the heat buildup. okay, even if you're using lubricant, the amount, when your stone gets worn and glazed, you're automatically going to realize that it's not cutting the way it should be, and so you're going to increase your pressure. Okay, when you start increasing your pressure, you start making it cut more, but that's because you're increasing your friction. Okay, now when you start thinking about the edge of your knife, okay, just look at how tiny that edge actually is. Okay, I mean, it's you know, this part right here is the part of steel that we're talking about. Okay, that's a very, very small sliver of steel. When you start putting an awful lot of pressure on that little bitty piece of steel, and then especially since it's not cutting very good and you're in a hurry and you want to sharpen it, you start moving faster and faster and faster. Now you're increasing pressure and increasing speed, which means you're probably going to get quite a bit of heat in that steel. And your stone isn't cutting properly, okay? So now instead of these cuts inside the side of your edge bevel, you get more. Instead of the cuts being nice and crisp and sharp, they end up being kind of glazed over, okay? And that part's really kind of tough to describe because I haven't actually been able to see it in the microscope. But I'm pretty sure it happens because that's the way the edges act. You know, you'll have an edge that cuts nice and crisp and clean for a pretty good amount of time, and then you sharpen it on a worn stone, even of the same grit, and it doesn't act right, okay? It acts like the serrations aren't as sharp as what they should be, and I believe that's exactly what's happening. So, symptoms of that are going to be, you know, an edge that you might have done everything else right. You picked your edge grit right, you picked your, you know, your sharpening style right, you de-stressed the edge, you either didn't come to a burr or you did come to a burr and then you removed it effectively, but the edge just doesn't act like it should with that particular grit of sharpening stone. Take a look at your stone, okay? I bet you that's where your problem is going to be. Now, the fix for that is pretty much just to clean your stone, and maintain it. Now, if you're using a man-made water stone, okay, so like the King 1000, 6000 grit stone that I like so much, the KW65, I think. Okay, those or your Norton water stones, any of those, you know, nice soft stones like that, you can just take another diamond plate and scrape off the top of it underneath running water. That will flatten the stone out. It'll flatten it, and it'll take that top layer of glazed abrasive particles and just strip them right off. Expose fresh stone underneath, and you're back to good. The the Norton crystalline coarse fine, one of my other favorite stones, I have actually had fairly good luck with that with a diamond plate, you know, the cheap Harbor Freight one, the diamond hone block, I think they call it. It's a four-sided one. That will actually strip off enough, you know, enough of the old stone surface and get you back to good new surface. Other than that, you're looking at loose silicon carbide powder on plate glass or granite tile, something like that. I've heard of people being able to do it with regular like play sand, you know, and just throwing some play sand on the, you know, on plate glass or an old granite tile, and then, you know, with water, of course, figure eight, you know, and it'll strip the top of the stone off and you're good to go there. But if the edge that you've known and loved for so long all of a sudden just doesn't seem to be quite acting right, and you're doing everything else right, take a look at your stone. I bet you the stone's glazed, or it's plugged up, or the surface has gone dull and it's not going to cut the same kind of edge that a fresh stone will. So again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time.